welcome to Red Barrel's podcast. It's episode 2. They said it couldn't be done, but it has happened. It's real. It's actual. It's in your podcast machine, phone or whatever. Right now, it's in there. So don't say we haven't done it, because we have. You've just heard an incredible new theme song by a Brilliant Drink, who is one of Sofie's fans and patrons on her incredible streaming channel. And that seems like a good segue to introduce everyone here. I'm Alex. I'm your host. And also there's Sofie, who I just mentioned.
I'm Sofie, or Sofrilly. I'm your other host.
And I'm Ed, your final host on this episode 2, Attack of the Barrels.
Wow, he's got energy, right? He's got the pep. He's showing us all up.
I'm so excited to be here. I've got the Christmas spirit flowing through me.
Yes, it is almost Christmas, and I will be saying this is our final podcast of the year. I know you've been thinking it's been so long. We've had 2 of them. Woo! It's time for a break. But what can I say? What can I say? It's Christmas. We're not going to be doing any more until the new year. But they will be coming. But because it's Christmas, already, you see, we're risk takers. We're changing up the format already. Episode 2, it's all out the window. Because this time, instead of talking about the games we've been playing this week, we are doing our end of year awards. Now, other people, they might do best game of the year, best graphics of the year, and we'll be talking about the game awards later. But before that, we've got our version of end of the year awards, and that is the only one that truly matters, and that is which games are the most ideologically correct of 2024. That's right, we're a political podcast, and that's the only thing that matters about games is their political content. And who's going to be determining what constitutes ideologically correct? Well, the answer is us, the most authoritative political minds in the world.
Yes, in the world.
In the world,
you know,
we're
actually.
number one.
Can't contest it.
Yeah. Any politician, any activist, anyone who's like stood firm against genocide and exploitation, they're nothing compared to us. We are the ultimate authority. So having established that, maybe we should get on with it. We're going to talk about our 3 games. We've each got one that we've played this year that we think is particularly correct ideologically. And then afterwards, we're going to have a bit of a tussle and decide which is the number 1. And then that game will be crowned. Well, it won't be crowned because we don't agree with monarchies, but it will be named the most ideologically correct game of the year 2024. And first up, well,
I just didn't know we were tussling, and now I'm nervous. I'm so nervous now.
I mean, I've been preparing for this tussle for months.
You're going down, Sofie.
Yeah, this is it. You got to. I mean, in the struggle session, you have to fight back for your ideals or get into brutal self-criticism. Those are your choices.
I'm good at both of those, so that's great.
I think we've all got a bit of panache at it. But yeah, so first up is going to be me. I'm sorry about that, everyone. And my most ideologically correct game of the year is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes, it's
all right.
Now, I think some people might find this a bit surprising. These games are incredibly commercial. I guess maybe a notorious Concord may have done better, or maybe Call of Duty, but it's probably in the running for the most expensive game made this year. It is wildly extravagant with just a ridiculous amount of incredibly high detailed content. But I maintain that the Final Fantasy... So, for those who don't know, Final Fantasy VII was a game that came out in, I believe, 1997 for the PlayStation, like a seminal RPG. And it's been very popular ever since. And then a few years ago, they finally came out with the long-awaited remake. But this was only the remake of the first section of the game, the first few hours where you were in this big cyberpunk city called Midgar. And then there's going to be 2 more games after that, making a full trilogy that retells and obviously, because it's now 3 games long, wildly expands on the story of the original game. And this is the middle one. As I say, it might seem like a kind of an odd choice for, radical politics, but I maintain this is a bold claim I'm going to make. I think that Final Fantasy VII, the remake trilogy, or at least the first 2 of them, is...
Brace yourself.
I think it's the most left-wing, like, big-budget media thing in current times.
That is bold.
More than any movie,
that is extremely
any
bold.
other video game thing. big TV show, I think is the most left-wing.
I'm inclined to immediately disagree, but I'll hear you out.
Oh, wow. See, this tussle's going to be good. That's what we're here for. No, okay, so just kind of a primer on what Final Fantasy VII, both the original and the new ones are. So in Final Fantasy VII, it posits a fantasy world where instead of under the ground being like lava and stuff, there's this green flowing goo alternatively called the Life Stream and Marco. And this corporation called Shinra has discovered a way to basically burn it to create electricity. And so they've become so huge, they now run the entire world. And in particular, this giant city called Midgar. Now, as part of the kind of lore of the game, it becomes clear that, in fact, the green goo is, in fact, the souls of everyone on the planet. When you die, you return to the goo, your soul returns to the goo, and then they never call it goo in the game. I'm calling it, that's my own little addendum. Your souls return to the goo, and when new people and even animals and stuff and plants are born, they take the souls out of the goo. So it's a grand cycle. And so by burning it to create energy, it's destroying that and it's destroying the planet.
And that's a real no-no.
Yeah. People generally are against it. Well, good people are. Sadly, too many are not against it. And obviously, this is a pretty transparent environmental allegory, right? Now, at the beginning of the first Final Fantasy game and the remake series, you start off, you're playing this guy Cloud, who is a mercenary hired by Avalanche, which is literally a terrorist group that is bombing one of the Marco reactors to, shut it down. Now, in the original game, back on the PlayStation, they didn't really go that in depth on the kind of politics of that. But ultimately, yeah, you were literally the good guys in the game who you played as, because you end up controlling a bunch of the other members of this group, are part of a terrorist group that is fighting against a corporation that rules the world, eco-terrorists as well. But again, the politics didn't really get into it. When you leave the big city, which is the end of the original remake game, and then you go out into the world, a lot of the political stuff kind of falls away, and it mainly turns into story of you hunting down Sephiroth, this big bad guy, who himself is like a genetic experiment made by that corporation. So it's still like the corporation's fault, but it doesn't really get into it that much. But in these new games, because they just have so much more time to fill, basically, they get properly into it. And I'm kind of amazed by how hard it goes. So in the original Final Fantasy VII remake, so the head of Avalanche, the terrorist group, is this guy called Barrett, who is not a terribly... Well, your first impression of seeing him is that he's a kind of a questionable Mr. T guy. He literally has a machine gun grafted onto his arm. He's also just generally huge. But they do a lot of stuff with his character. He's really deep and complex and incredibly sympathetic. And again, he is literally a terrorist who blows up these reactors and happily is willing to enact political violence for the betterment of humanity and the planet. The game goes to some really long length to defend this position. There's in the last game, there's a whole section where Shinra, the evil corporation, has I won't get into it, but it's basically done this huge atrocity that's killed thousands of people, and they've put the blame on an Avalanche. And they go raid the headquarters, and they're all like, oh, but all these people ended up dying. And he basically just lays out a full, unambiguous defense of, these people, they work in this, you may think they're innocent, but they work for this giant corporation, and they are also culpable for its crimes.
Luigi, anyone?
Yeah. Sadly, Luigi isn't in this game. That's a different series.
Cannot wait.
But yeah, oh man, what a crossover.
What a crossover.
I mean, Cloud's in...
Current events.
Cloud's in Smash Brothers, so it could happen, right? It could happen.
Ooh. Yeah. Okay, get it.
Anyway, that's all in the last game, which is not what I'm saying is the most ideologically correct game of this year. What I'm saying is the new one, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, I don't know if I'd have this as my game of the year because I have issues with the end. However, I think the politics in this game are just impeccable. You continue to fight against this corporation. A lot of the political and corporate stuff is still very high priority in the story, unlike the original game. And kind of what amazes me the most is this one section. So first of all, unlike the original game, I genuinely think some people who kind of are involved in actual leftist movements might have been involved in making this game, because they really start exploring like the different factionalism between the groups who are fighting the corporation. So it turns out that the Avalanche group led by our heroes is actually a splinter group who are more radical than the main group. And like
That is quite left, yeah.
just to be clear, the quote unquote main group are also a paramilitary force who like will fight Shinra commandos and stuff. They aren't.
I don't know. Sound like liberals to me, Alex.
Hey man, I'm just saying that's how far it goes. But then in this game, there's this whole section where you go to a place called Junon Harbor, which was an area in the original game, and the whole thing is expanded hugely. I mean, genuinely, the whole section where you go to Junon is probably the highlight of the game. There's so many great bits that are just, in general, these games are unbelievably not just faithful to the original, but they like even the smallest little moment that was in the original game is like brought out in these games and expanded, and like it shows that they actually really cared and knew what was great about it.
Is it better than the original?
I mean, I would say that you absolutely cannot play the new ones without having played the original. This kind of goes outside of the scope of the politics, but there is a whole aspect to the game where it is playing with the story of the original. And I genuinely don't think you'd understand what's going on in this game if you hadn't played the original. Don't know what's going on with it. So I would absolutely say if you want to play this game and these games, then I think you should. That you should also, unfortunately, I'm basically before you play these two 100-hour games, you should also play this 50-hour game made 25 years ago.
And that's our homework for this week.
Yeah, I would expect all of our listeners to get that done by the time you do our next episode. Yeah, but I mean, they are great though, and I think everyone should play the original. I think it's a phenomenal game anyway. Anyway, you go to this Junon Harbor, and when you arrive, you discover, so in the original game, Junon Harbor was originally like a fishing village, and then Shinra came and they just built this huge harbor and military installation basically on top of it. But the village is still there kind of underneath. And in the original game, this is like barely even actually mentioned, but it's just kind of implied by the environment. You go and there's this village and then there's this huge thing on top. Whereas in this, not only they talk about it, they talk about the Republic of Junon that originally was there and was eventually conquered by Shinra. But when you arrive, there are these protesters who are all outside the gates to the harbor shouting down about Junon. And that's a completely new element. And then later on, you can go on the other side of this huge map and there's a completely new town called the Crow's Nest. Now, this town is literally a town of radicals. The people who were protesting before, they all live in this town. And I mean, genuinely, the town feels like it was made by some people who are lovingly taking the piss out of the left in that in the way that we take the piss out of ourselves. Because they're all like hanging around and like organizing leafleting and like sit-ins and like consciousness raising events, and you and your guys are literally terrorists who are walking in, and they're just like this attitude of like, oh, they're sweet, I guess, and like the game is, I mean, the only conclusion I can take from this is that the game is saying, this peaceful stuff is nice, but really we need Barrett to come and blow up a reactor or two. That's what we really need to achieve real change in this world. And I mean, that's that is not a message I would expect to get from any game that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make.
And without giving us any spoilers for a potential third Final Fantasy VII remake,
sure.
Is this going to get undone in any way?
Well, this is my fear, and it may come back that this section's going to be clipped, and I'm going to be mercilessly mocked online because of how incredibly melty the third one is.
Cloud looks straight at the gamer and is like, "We should have just voted harder the whole time."
Yeah, exactly. Well, genuinely, maybe that hasn't happened yet. However, in the original PlayStation game, towards the end of it, there is a section where Barrett, the rebel leader guy, he basically kind of apropos of nothing says, "Oh, I kind of feel bad about all the violence we did, and we shouldn't have done the violence. And this is despite the fact that they're literally fighting. They're literally fighting against a corporation that runs a single corporation that runs the entire planet.
I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad, Barrett.
It's not like they can vote them out in any way. So I'm really hoping that doesn't happen.
That's the opposite of what happens a lot, though, right? Like, oftentimes they'd have this Barrett character sort of inexplicably start mass murdering completely unrelated people to go, look, it turns out terrorism was bad all the time.
Yeah. I mean, they've avoided that. And I should say, I think at this point they would have the reason I am worried that'll happen in the third game, but I kind of don't think they will, because they've gone so hard the other way. They repeatedly, like Barrett all through the second game, just keeps, you can talk to him a lot, and he keeps reinforcing this message. They keep digging further down the political violence hole. In fact, so one of the things that happens in the original game is that there's a bit where you can go on a date. And it turns out when you get there that there's been a secret kind of point system all the way through the game where you've made choices, and depending on the things you've done, it basically chooses which of the characters Cloud goes on a date with.
Okay.
So like the end of Mass Effect 2 that we talked about last time.
A little bit. I mean, this was many years before Mass Effect 2, so it was Mass Effect 2 that stole everything.
You take that back. They had the idea first.
In the original, the game is obviously, it's very much, people have even like hacked into it and discovered exactly how the point system works. So the game is set up for you to essentially go on a date with one of the main girls in the game. But there were also a bunch of other options that if you kind of really had to game the system to get. And one of them was to go on a date with Barrett, which is, there is actually a very interesting kind of queer undertone of the original Final Fantasy VII, but that's not really the intention of that point. It's basically as a joke. But in this game, I ended up accidentally getting the date with Barrett.
Oh, cute.
And it was just because I agreed with him every single fucking time. He's just like, yeah, man, we've got to kill all these Shinra corporates. And I'm like, yes, Barrett, 100%. I'm on board. And I ended up going on the date
And
with him.
he's just twirling his hair, you know.
Well, he's not really got long enough hair to twirl. But yes, in general.
Find a way.
Stroking his beard. Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much that this game goes into about just how the corporation rules everything. A lot of it gets a bit kind of, a lot of the villains are quite kind of pantomime-y in many ways, but there are often just bits where it just really, like, there's this whole dog that this isn't in the original game, but there's a cartoon dog that they added.
I've heard about this.
Oh, well, that's because the cartoon dog also relates to the weird multiverse shit that goes on in the game. Okay. That's kind of separate.
What? There's a multiverse. Does everything have a multiverse?
Well, this sort of does, yes.
But at least this one has a dog to balance it out.
Yeah. Well, basically, this cartoon dog is it's like a mascot of the corporation, and it's got its own theme song, and the theme song is all about how, you just got to be a good boy and like stand up for what's right, by which I mean what the Shinra Corporation would like to be right.
I take it back. I'm officially anti-dog.
No, the dog's amazing. Just the fact that it is such a big budget game, and there are these themes in it. And so far, again, we've got through 2 of these games, and they've continually gone so hard on the politics. I should say that in the DLC that came out of the first game, they explicitly say that, so basically there's these 2 characters who are a separate faction. They're from a different country, and they're fighting for like national liberation, literally. And they're working with Avalanche, but they have a conversation at one point among themselves saying, oh, the differences between them and Avalanche. And they say, well, Avalanche, their main goals are anti-imperialism, workers' rights, and democracy.
Monsters.
And the redistribution of wealth.
Monsters.
And it's just like, okay, so they are literally socialists.
Yeah.
They just decided to just chuck that in. Yeah, the heroes of this game and the people who are inarguably correct are the socialist terrorists, violent revolutionaries. You might get, I don't know, in a Marvel movie, you might get like kind of Killmonger who's like, oh, he's got some points, but he's gone too far, like you were saying, Ed, and so ultimately he's got to be taken down. But man, we can think about those points and then never act on them. Don't worry about it, gang. And this is just like full on, no, you're going to be blowing up corporate bases. They're always bad. There's no quarter given. And maybe they'll pull back on that in the final game, but I hope they don't. But for now, I would personally crown Final Fantasy VII Rebirth my most ideologically correct game of the year.
I was about to clap, but I was like, the mic's not going to pick that up. But thank you.
Well, that's
Yes, thank you, Alex.
You know what? I can't be bothered to find a sound library that's just that's gonna have a round of applause in it. And if I do, I'm just gonna, that's a dangerous tool. Like how frequently am I just gonna put in round of applauses for all the various things I say? Well, that's Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Again, I'm putting it forward. I think that's most ideologically correct. But Mr. Potter, Edward, I believe you have an opposing opinion, which is hard to imagine.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that contribution, Alex, such as it was. My dialectical materialist understanding of history has revealed to me, without a shadow of a doubt, that the most ideologically correct game that I played this year is Frostpunk.
Wow, Frostpunk 2, the game that came out this year, right?
Irrelevant. Frostpunk 1.
Frostpunk, wait, just to be clear, you're talking about Frostpunk 1.
I'm talking about Frostpunk 1, baby.
What year did that come out?
It came out in the year of our Lord 2018. And that's irrelevant because I played it in 2024. And that's what this podcast is all about.
This is it, man. Ed Potter, rule breaker, heart taker. Ladies, people are calling him the bad boy of the Red Barrels podcast.
And I wish you'd stop calling me that, Alex. It's getting very uncomfortable. Look, so long-time listeners of the podcast...
Can't take a compliment.
Long-time listeners of the podcast might remember that I said in our first episode, that I was planning to play Frostpunk, and I have not let you down.
Wow. Promises made, promises kept.
Exactly. Since then, I've played A New Home, which is the main story of Frostpunk. Okay. So I'll give you some general thoughts, and then I'll prove conclusively with scientific socialist reasoning that this is the most ideologically correct game of 2024, despite coming out in 2018.
It's like Lenin's in the room with us. It's incredible.
So yeah, Frostpunk is a 2018 city-building survival game from 11-Bit Studios, in which you're in charge of a human settlement in a frozen wilderness, and you need to make the key decisions to help the settlement survive.
Right.
So I'm just going to give you my general thoughts first of all. I found this game dangerously engaging.
Ooh.
For me, it was exactly the right amount of stuff to balance at once in terms of the various different things you've got to be thinking about. Hope, dissatisfaction, iron, wood. Like, it was exactly pushing me to my little brain to its max.
I'm always looking for iron.
Exactly. So one weekend, I started playing it at 9 p.m. And then I didn't stop until 3 a.m. Oh my God. When I went to bed, I woke up at 10 a.m. and played it straight through until 4:30 p.m. with only a 30-minute lunch break in that whole stretch. Wow. And that's not very uncharacteristic for me. I'm usually very disciplined in my game playing, but Frostpunk, it pulled me in.
What'd you have for lunch?
A sandwich.
What
Sorry,
sandwich?
Cammy. Huh?
What sandwich?
Probably. Is this going to be in the podcast? Probably fake ham.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got it sorted.
So I rest my case. Right. And part of that as well was, I just think, for me, the difficulty of the game was perfect. Like, it feels like a challenge because the first time through, you will absolutely fail unless you're a far better gamer than me. But you learn so much from each attempt through that you improve so quickly that overall it's just a really gripping experience. And every time I failed, I felt like I've learned so much I can just go back and do it straight over again.
Ooh.
Ultimately, the first time through, I failed on day 20. The second time through, I failed on about day 40. And the third time through, I beat the game.
But before we continue, what is it that you actually do in Frostpunk?
So you're managing resources, you're sort of passing laws, you're trying to keep satisfaction up and hope up and make sure that people aren't starving, aren't freezing to death.
So it's a city builder, basically.
It's a city builder,
yeah. And from my understanding, it's like set in like kind of a post-apocalyptic world where it's just got really, really cold for some reason. And you're like some last survivors and you're all huddled around some like giant heater or something, or a reactor or something that heats things up.
Yeah, that's more or less the gist of it. Yeah. And yeah, a big part of the game is resource management.
Yeah.
Which is a mechanic that lots of games have, but it's on that basis that I'm going to claim that this is the most ideologically correct game of the year. Or perhaps it's better thought of as ideologically useful. Ooh. So, alongside playing this game, I did more homework and I read the book Everything to Play For, written by Games Transform 2024 speaker.
Oh, wow. God.
Mariam Did Galvidata? I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Which recently came out with Verso and is worth checking out. And that
See, this is the grind set. Always on,
Oh, yeah.
always
Always
grinding, always hustling.
I can't be contained. So that had me thinking about politics and video games beyond just the surface level narrative stuff that Alex was talking about. I'm thinking more.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's right. I'm thinking more about the political usefulness of video games.
Oh, wow.
And that further reminded me of what Pop Culture Detective
Oh, there we go.
said at Games Transformed
Again.
again.
Always hustling. Always
plugging
hustling.
it, baby. See you in 2025. what they said in 2024, which was about board games having their origin in its popularized current form in the British Empire, where a lot of play in those games reflected like imperialism.
Yeah.
And in some cases, there was the argument that they could be seen as like almost sort of training for running an empire.
Yeah.
So my proposition, friends, comrades, loved ones, is games like this are to some extent useful training in how to run a society. Now available not just to the imperialist dogs that run the British Empire, but to anyone who is able to buy and play a video game. So I think Frostpunk and games like it are useful politically. They encourage you to think about how to plan, how to use resources, how to manage them rationally. And I think if we want to build a world where workers can manage our complex modern society, games that simulate this are useful as a kind of beginner training. I think in a very stripped back form, learning all this stuff is giving us the skills we need, in a very limited way, to administer the beautiful socialist future we're all working towards. So that's my first point there. And so that's, I think, decisively already proved that it's better than Final.
Pretty good point.
A pretty good point.
Listener, he's been banging his shoe on the table the whole way through that. That's a historical reference to Khrushchev, everyone. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's very good. Right. And what's more, following finishing the game, I was left thinking about what the world would be like, what this reality would be like if we used resources as rationally as you're forced to do in Frostpunk. You're able to achieve so much rationally planning an economy in this game with incredibly limited resources. And I couldn't help but think, how would the world look in reality with our relatively abundant resources if our economy was similarly rationally planned? What would we prioritize? How far would it be from how we organize our society today? Maybe we wouldn't spend as much money on advertising or private jets. This is the question that the game left me with. And perhaps with games, we'd see fewer predatory cash shops or gambling and things like that. So these are the core reasons I think that this game is useful ideologically, with this being a fantastic example of the kind of utility games can have. It's got both an educative function and it's also fun, so you want to keep playing it and getting that kind of perspective. Now, I'm not going to say that the game is doing this on purpose. Like, I don't think it's necessarily explicitly or intentionally having this political effect, but I don't think it really needs to be doing it intentionally or explicitly to have that effect. And I don't want to pretend. I know we're going to have our little battle later on, our wrestling match, as it were. I don't want to pretend there's no limitations to this, right? Because there are. So when we're thinking on the left here about the kind of world we want to build, we're thinking about a world that we can plan collectively. And that collective element is something which is very limited in Frostpunk. I mean, it's not completely absent. It does have some social elements. You know, dissatisfaction and hope are key things. Those are social relations fundamentally. Like, that's more important than wood and iron in the game. Those are the key outputs against which you're measured. You've got to pass legislation, and some of that stuff is explicitly socialist. You can pass laws to legalise labour unions. You can introduce collective bargaining. You can even found workers' councils. Although I will say I did not come across any of those naturally in my gameplay. So they're not exactly at the forefront. Possibly they're not included in the main story and only in some of the other campaigns.
All right.
While I think it's not modelling a collective decision-making process exactly. So that is definitely a limitation. However, I really enjoyed the game. I was totally gripped by it. It asked exactly the right amount of me. It juggled the right number of different things without keeping me engaged, but without making me feel overwhelmed. Each scenario was short enough that I kept coming back for more. The learning curve was sharp, but still fun. And I think despite the imperial origins of games like this, there is something empowering for us as a class to have this practice of rationally managing a society accessible to large numbers of us in society right now. even though it does only a very limited job of simulating social relations, which in reality would be the core of collectively managing society. So for me, this is enough to crown it as the most ideologically correct game I've played in 2024. I'm excited to duke it out. Even though I don't think it was perfect, the radical potential of games that help us manage societies ourselves, even at this kind of basic level, is something exciting, and I loved it. I'd recommend it. Go play it.
Ooh.
And I mean, also, just any games that remind you that workers, councillors and unions exist and are important is a lot of fun, isn't it? I mean, Victoria 3 a few years ago, shout out to that.
That was fun. Everyone loved that.
So that was the correct answer to the question of what's most ideologically correct.
Wow, big words.
I think we're going to now pass to Sofie, who's going to
Well,
try...
I'd like to interrogate Frostpunk a little bit.
Uh-oh. Alex is going to interject.
Well, I admittedly have not played Frostpunk, but my kind of understanding of it was that, and maybe this is wrong, I'm happy to admit that it was...
I'm hoping it is.
Ill-informed. But I kind of got the feeling that it's sort of... kind of grimdark, that it was all about making really hard choices and then all the choices kind of blow up in your face. You know, like under the impression that your workers can come and demand to make a workers' council, but then that means they start asking for too much stuff, and so then you have to start curtailing workers' rights because you're up in such an extreme environment that it's always not going to work out. There's not enough to go around, so it's got to be some sort of brutal feudalism or something.
Well, I see why you'd get that impression. That was more or less how the game felt for my first 2 playthroughs. But as you go on and you improve and you get better at rationally planning your fictional economy, you're able to avoid that. Even in those conditions where resources are very, very scarce, you're still able to... For example, there are some crucial points in the game where you can turn away or accept a series of refugees. Mm-hmm. And being the good boy that I am, I obviously accepted the refugees at every turn, which, there was a cost associated with it, but it was something that I had planned sufficiently so that I was easily able to overcome the cost. So, yeah, there is this kind of grimdark element, but it can be overcome with, solid enough planning. Yeah,
because, actually, that's a pretty good argument in your favour, because that suggests that the first 2 times true socialism had never been tried, and then finally in the third time it was a skill issue. You did try true socialism.
I tried it really hard,
and of course it worked,
and it paid off big time. And all those refugees were happily rehoused, and we lived happily ever after.
Wow. I'm impressed. Well done.
I think I've convinced everyone. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone.
No. I definitely don't need to present now. We'll just call it there.
It's over. Ed banged the shoe. Our new listener, he gave a bit of a grimace when I said banged the shoe. It's not my fault you don't know about the famous event where Khrushchev banged a shoe on the table during the UN session. Come on.
I'm sorry, everyone, that I don't know that reference. I'm sure you do all know that reference yourselves.
They're all judging you, Ed. No, they're not.
This is tough to take.
All right. Well, I do think unless you have questions about Frostpunk, we want to interrogate Ed in the struggle session.
Just try it, Sofie.
No, I don't know. I really enjoyed that presentation.
It's very good.
Been thinking about Frostpunk myself. I think that's kind of the idea of a city builder that isn't inherently colonial.
Yeah.
Right? Is that that seems really novel. I feel like every city builder I can think of is quite colonial. If you're not colonizing other countries or other regions, then you're colonizing the earth and the resources.
Yeah, I mean, one of these days I'll go on to do my rant about how right-wing SimCity is. I remember I played the original SimCity when I was a kid, and without knowing anything, because I'm such a pure, true Marxist, I without having to be told about it, I automatically implemented progressive taxation, and then I just immediately ran out of money every time. So
I do have a question, which I'm curious. I guess, is there a way? Are there multiple ways to win the game? Is there a exploitative run? Is there a way that you can play the game poorly in order to win?
Well,
poorly ethically.
Yeah, I mean,
cruelly.
You can absolutely play it cruelly, no doubt about that, and it will be easier to win if you play it cruelly. Mm-hmm. There's no question about that. There's only really one win condition, which is survive the requisite number of days, and that's literally it. So within that, you can manage the society more or less how you want. I think I've looked up like different ways that people have played it afterwards, and certainly the meta is to play it in quite a brutal way. Turn away those refugees, right? That's the sort of meta.
Yeah.
But I think the possibility of you being able to go against that, showing that it's a real option for us if we, rationally plan sufficiently well, to me, that's what's exciting about it. Like, I think the fact that you can play it cruelly doesn't diminish the fact that you can also go against the easier option and do something more positive.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I would 100% agree with that. Like, I don't think, just because you can kill Sims in The Sims doesn't mean it's a death simulator, right? You can also just
it is the way
make
I
people
play.
Happy. Well, I don't know. I'm how many months am I clean? I think I'm 8 months clean of The Sims.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Almost a year clean. So. So I won't be talking about that. Great. I guess shall I?
Yes. Let's move
game?
on to Sophie's game.
Yes. Okay. So I'm very excited to talk about my game. Although I do feel a bit following in what's the phrase? Hard act to follow. Slightly. But
I'm sure that you're going to make us all look like GB News viewers.
Like GB News, like fools. All right. So I'm going to be talking about Still Weeks the Deep. You got to say it in a Scottish accent because it's very Scottish.
I mean, we might have some Scottish listeners, so I apologise.
I apologise in advance. I apologise. I won't keep it up for the whole thing. Don't worry. Just for a good 30-minute portion. I'm joking.
Okay.
I'm joking. Yes, I'm going to be talking about Still Wakes the Deep, which is a game that I did actually play on stream, and I fucking loved it. I loved this game so much. It was actually a gift from a friend who spotted it and thought that I would like it based on my love for the book and movie Annihilation, which the game is clearly inspired by.
Oh, really?
Heavily inspired by, both in the visuals and the theme. We'll get into that. And I loved this game. I played it on stream and I couldn't wait to sort of continue through more of it. I finished it in 2 streams, which is really unusual for me.
Sure.
I'm a very, very slow gamer usually, but kind of similar to you, very uncharacteristically enjoyed this game. So Still Wakes the Deep, if you don't know, is a 2024 psychological horror video game developed by the Chinese Room and published by Secret Mode. This is the same studio that released Amnesia, Machine for Pigs, and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture.
Yeah.
Neither of which I've played, although I have heard about people praising the politics of Machine for Pigs.
I haven't played that. I played Everybody Goes to the Rapture.
Oh.
And I don't remember politics being particularly interesting in that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they could do it. They've got range.
Yeah. So it's set in December 1975 on an oil rig called the Beira D. Beira, importantly, potentially, is the goddess of winter and the creator of weather, according to Scottish folklore.
Wow.
So you play as Cameron Kaz McLeary, brilliantly performed by Alec Newman, is a married man with 2 daughters who's on the run from Scottish police after a violent altercation with a man called Billy Chamberlain. To avoid prison and earn money to keep his wife and children from losing their flat, Kaz accepts a position as an electrician aboard the Beira D oil rig, which is poorly constructed and run by the universally disliked Rennick bossman character, just generally awful boss character.
Sure.
Everyone hates him on the ship. That's made very, very obvious immediately. So Kaz is fired on your you start the game, you're called into the office to meet with Rennick, this awful boss man. And Kaz is fired basically after Rennick discovers his trouble with the law. And before Kaz is able to board the helicopter due to return him home, a drilling attempt shakes the facility and Kaz and several other workers fall into the sea. When he wakes up, Kaz is the only worker to have survived the turbulent North Sea, as in the workers that fell into the ocean. There are still workers on the rig.
Yeah.
And he realizes, though, that the situation on the rig has deteriorated. It's begun falling apart as a strange, fleshy mass begins to infest and spread from the bowels of the rig. Kaz must attempt to escape the rig with as many of his co-workers as he can manage and is sent all over the winding and increasingly organic intestines of the rig to restart malfunctioning machinery, find the surviving crew, insulin for his diabetic co-worker, and hopefully rescue. So that's sort of a brief summary of the game.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, so it's an extremely sort of linear psychological horror, and I've basically written up why it is actually the most woke, the most based game of 2024. Not to mention actually in 2024. So, so basically, first
mine's based
of all,
on a game from 1997. So yours is the most current.
It is the most current, exactly. It is
we'll
the most current.
We'll find out if it's the most based.
So, I guess I have a few points to basically make. The first is that I think the game is clearly probably some kind of allegory to Scottish independence. It's extremely important that it is set presumably in the North Sea for reasons that will become clear a bit later.
I mean, I would imagine if they're all Scottish.
Yes.
It'd be weird if they were in
yes.
in, I don't know, some place they have oil.
Yeah, so most of them are
Middle East.
Scottish, but actually the cast is like delightfully diverse in terms of very underrepresented English and UK accents. Like a lot of people from very northern parts of England.
Nice.
And sort of just really nice representation, very sort of working class accent representation, which I think is important. And the performances are fantastic by all of the voice actors involved. But yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I guess a little bit of history about Scotland is that during the 1970s they sort of had this big oil rush. Basically they discovered oil in the North Sea, and that oil kind of became a symbol and like the economic weight that underpinned the Scottish independence movement during the 1970s, the time in which the game is set, and through to today it's still quite important as far as the Scottish independence movement goes in terms of
that's true.
It's kind of how the Scottish independent movement proposed funding an independent Scotland. It's primarily through their budget. I mean,
I think if there was someone from the SFB here, they would dispute that, but it's certainly a big part of it.
Yeah, but that's what I'm arguing is that basically it's a big part of it. Also, interestingly, I guess, like obviously, so oil is it's one of the massive things that funds Scotland's economy. It's a huge part of Scotland's economy. It was also, being an oil platform worker was recently in 2023 rated the third most dangerous job in the UK, as they must work from great heights at nighttime and in extreme weather conditions. So obviously I imagine there's quite a bit of controversy around the idea of kind of building an independence movement on this quite problematic industry, both from an environmental perspective and also just from a safety perspective. Like, it's a dangerous job. It's not a pleasant
I think I mean, I certainly don't want to speak for the Scottish independence movement, but I think basically at this point the oil is kind of running out, essentially.
Yes.
So the heyday is over. So if Scotland did go independent now, it would not be the driver of the Scottish economy. So I don't think it's that directly relevant these days. I don't want to say authoritatively that.
Fair, right. I guess 1970s also saw a period of recession in Scotland and the UK. Likely would have affected home lives, which is kind of depicted in the game. Kaz sort of has this quite, turbulent home life with his, wife and 2 kids in a flat that they're struggling to pay for. So it seems I just love the idea that they're kind of covering this from the perspective of, he takes on this job because he has to basically fund this flat, even though he has no experience on an oil rig. Shocking that they hired him in that, respect. And then also, he has no experience on an oil rig. And then also, it's just such a dangerous work environment. And to do that with 2 kids, just kind of such a rash decision. I think it's really important that a lot of the characters, including Kaz, kind of have quite passive leftist politics. They all sort of immediately dislike Rennick, the sort of boss character, very strong-handed, short-tempered boss character. There's definitely like a strong sense of union. I would say it's very, very pro-union, just in the way that sort of, it's not explicit in the game. Nowadays, the oil industry in Scotland is quite heavily unionized. But I don't know about the case back then.
I mean, if anything, it was probably more unionized back in the 70s, I imagine.
But even I think in 2023, they did like a massive 130,000 worker strike, I think, to protest working conditions and pay. So, it's an oil industry that's like, oil unions are important. And there's definitely like a lot more camaraderie amongst yourself and your workers. There's a cafeteria where you meet a lot of the sort of characters that you're going to be trying to rescue throughout the game, and that you also see sort of painfully transformed by this monster. Really, really sort of genuine emotional beats, because these characters in multiple times have probably tried to help you, or you've tried to help them, either before the game sort of really got started proper, or like while this monster is taking over the ship. So on the note of unions, basically they kind of work together to escape this oil rig, or to attempt to escape this oil rig. The boss battle in the end does end up being the boss, who sort of is transformed first.
Oh, I see.
Corrupted first by this monster.
Should say spoilers. Spoilers.
No, it's kind of obvious. That's quite obvious,
Okay.
You can kind of see that coming from the beginning. I'll leave out any sort of massive spoilers, but like he's the sort of big bad throughout the game, basically, which, you know, seems appropriate, seems quite Union to me.
Sure.
There's definitely commentary on unsafe working conditions, obviously touches on the actual unsafe working conditions of oil rigs. Yeah, I sort of wrote here that I feel like it's basically a love letter to the UK working class in the accent representation of like Glaswegian Scotland accents and stuff like that. There's also a character called Trots, which is probably explicitly a reference to Trotsky.
Probably.
And basically, I also think one of the biggest things here is that the historical context is really important, which is that I believe it's probably based on a real disaster called Piper Alpha. Have either of you heard of that?
I've heard of Piper Alpha, though. I don't know the details.
Yeah, so I've got the details. I was really excited about this. So, so clearly, obviously, a reference to Piper Alpha, which was an oil rig that began production in 1976, exploded and collapsed under the effect of sustained gas jet fires between 6 and 7 July 1988, my birthday. Not in 1988, but... killing 165 men on board, 30 of whom their bodies were never recovered. So genuine tragedy, massive tragedy that sort of, I believe, is probably still quite present in the Scottish consciousness today. Accident was blamed on inadequate maintenance and safety procedures, which sounds pretty classic. Specifically, the rig was originally just for oil, but was later then converted to add gas production. This would later become a problem as the design of the oil rig was initially designed to keep the most dangerous elements of oil production separate from personnel areas. But once it was converted to produce gas, they sort of broke the original safety concept and the layout of the design of the platform, leading to the gas compression module being next to the control room, for example, which played a significant role in the accident and the number of deaths.
Sophie, are you trying to tell me that they risked workers' lives to increase their profit margins?
I might be trying to tell you that they risked workers' lives.
Wow.
In order to make money. Yeah, exactly. So in the game, it's extremely linear. The sort of way that you play, it's extremely linear. And you progress through an increasingly tightening oil rig to fix malfunctioning parts of the rig in order to achieve objectives and then hopefully like save the rest of your colleagues. So like I think very much even in the environment, the sort of environmental storytelling of the game, it's this crushing environment. And it's very obvious that it was also not very well built in terms of a crisis. Yeah, the rig in the game, obviously, you're fighting the environment most of the time.
Yeah, of course.
Half the time you're, fighting this. You're not even really able to fight. You don't have a weapon. This is my favorite type of horror game, is that you don't have a weapon. You have no choice but to run or use stealth. That is my favorite type of horror game. I think every other type of horror game is inferior, and not using horror correctly, that's my strong opinion. But anyway... So then obviously the rig itself is dangerous, even if it weren't for the actual monster. It's falling apart, it's collapsing, you're constantly fighting the environment. And I just think that very much feels like a commentary on unsafe working environments and the fact that like you could die just because of some worker, forgot to do a safety check or something, which is essentially what happened with the actual Piper Alpha, is just a bunch of mistakes then ended up and with this poor safety procedure.
What year did the Piper Alpha happen?
That was 1976.
Oh, okay.
So definitely topical in terms of the sort of era, which is kind of amazing, obviously, that like the Scottish this sort of independence movement was so into oil at the time, despite this having happened around that time as well.
Wait, sorry. The I think you said it happened in 80 something.
What? Sorry.
So Piper Alpha.
Piper Alpha happened in 1976. Oh, sorry. Wait. Oh, sorry. Began in production. Sorry, my bad. Yeah. Yes, that happened in 1988. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think that's relevant because energy production was privatized by Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. And the North Sea oil was basically the kind of economic, parachutes for Thatcherism, because frankly, probably the economy would have collapsed if she didn't get extremely lucky and they found oil in Scotland or in the North Sea. So that ended up being what funded it. And so I imagine that is not the fact that this was a privatized industry. It was not unconnected to the disaster. It's worth also pointing out that like Norway these days is like considered, they're very rich because they've got so much oil. But in fact, Norway had less oil than us. But just when they got oil, they put it into a sovereign fund, whereas we just privatized it and basically all that money just got pissed away to private companies. So I imagine that's a part of the stew of this game as well.
Definitely, yeah. No, I appreciate the added context. Yeah, definitely. I guess the sort of last argument I would make is obviously the environmental argument of the game. Clearly, it's a cosmic horror about discovering something while drilling too deep into the ocean. There's how it's pretty obvious. I basically said the setting itself is a criticism of the oil industry and capitalism as at large. It's a work of climate horror that depicts the consumption and corruption of both the environment and the people that work in the system. I think corruption is a really important word here because the sort of ocean becomes corrupted. It becomes this monstrous creature. The rig becomes corrupted. A lot of the workers and the boss man in particular becomes corrupted by this sort of cosmic horror. Again, very Annihilation inspired. And yeah, just sort of the idea of this constant extraction of resources and kind of just like, well, here's your bed. Now you kind of got to lay in it. Yeah. And I think, I think my sort of only criticism of the game is that it is extremely linear, which can feel a bit like playing on a dolly track for a while, or basically for the entire game. And I think it's like £30 or so. So some people might not like that, but
it was on. I think it was on Microsoft or Xbox Game Pass. Yeah. I seem to remember seeing it on there, but I didn't get a chance to play it myself.
Yeah, which I would highly recommend it. The music is amazing, the performances are amazing, the setting is amazing, and it is just extremely based in a way that I think it feels like subtle enough that it doesn't feel like propaganda, even though it is. But I feel like it doesn't feel like propaganda. But I think people would also pick up on the sort of themes of sticking out for your coworkers and stuff. I really just like there's a character who's like one of your best friends who has diabetes, mentions it quite early on, and then halfway through he asks you to find insulin for him, which obviously you're trying to save this collapsing oil rig. It's kind of. But he still says, yeah, sure, I'll go find this insulin. And I feel like it tells an important story there of disability, specifically in the case of climate crisis, is that I think a lot of people don't really think about what happens to disabled folks when climate crisis inevitably happens. And for me, that feels like, no man left behind imagery, which I just really appreciated. I loved it. I loved the game so much. But yeah.
Well, it sounds really good. And I will definitely check it out.
Yeah, I really appreciate art that emphasizes the system behind the individuals at play. I think it's so easy to tell a story about a bad boss or something and have that boss be bad for no reason. He's just sort of a dick and that's it. But this story has this whole sort of metaphorical sort of background thing sort of standing in for capitalism essentially. That is very compelling. I do grant you that is a good entry into our 2024 most ideologically correct games battle.
I should say there are kind of honorable mentions. I know a lot of people have been playing Metaphor ReFantagio, and I've heard people say the politics in that are at least interesting. I also heard that they kind of fumbles it at the end. I don't know. I've not played it. I don't think. Have any of you played Metaphor ReFantagio?
No,
I'm afraid not.
Oh, that's a pity. And what that means, listener, is that you shouldn't play that game. Only the coolest people in the world who play the best games and have the best politics have not played it. Therefore, it's not worth playing.
Play Still Wakes the Deep.
Or you can instead play Still Wakes the Deep. Okay, well it's time for the tussle. I promised a tussle. We have to decide which one of those three games we're going to crown our number one most ideologically correct game of the year. So. Anyone want to say anything in their own defense?
So, well, actually, I'm going to take a different tack here.
Oh, wow.
So I like my game a lot. I really do.
Yeah.
But I do think your Frostpunk case is extremely compelling. I think it's just...
Did make a good case.
The idea of just something being sort of an educational toolkit, I think one of the biggest issues we have on the left right now is people kind of agree with ideas. They say, okay, capitalism sucks.
Yeah.
Let's create a culture of care. Let's, do universal basic income, blah, blah, blah. But I think we don't really understand the steps to get there. And I'm in favor of anything that kind of helps us understand the steps to get there. And I love books like that. I'm also currently reading Everything to Play For, as we speak. Not right as we speak, but I'm currently reading it.
Only when me and Alex are speaking.
Yeah, exactly. I get really bored. I get bored. No.
Don't make the pages rustle on the microphone. A mess to edit out.
There you go. So yeah, I actually think that's really compelling, even though I haven't played it. And I may or may not, to be honest, because like I'm not a huge resource management person. I'm not a huge like city builders or simulation person in general. I really struggle with them, especially the learning curves. I feel like one day I dream of just like dropping a Ritalin and then playing loads of simulation games and seeing if it helps me. But like I genuinely struggle with Civ, and I don't think that's supposed to be the point, but here I am. But I think that's a really compelling case, actually. Like I think like Still Wakes the Deep utilizes setting so well. Like the setting in the cheesiest possible way is a character in and of itself. You know, the oil rig is a character. Yeah, I think I found the sort of use of setting there really compelling. But I feel like I was kind of trying to force a bit of the sort of how gameplay is also a good use of the video game medium in order to share a leftist message, which I do think, like, when you're talking about video games, I think we need to consider multiple components in terms of how compelling they are as, like, sharing a leftist message. And I think probably it sounds to me like Frostpunk uses gameplay in a way that's quite compelling, maybe a bit more compelling than I sort of forced with mine. But
well, does personally beating to death huge numbers of corporate stooge military personnel, does that count as a gameplay tactic?
I just feel like that's, I don't know, I just feel like I'm also just not convinced that Final Fantasy is not going to go back on it in the third one. I'm not convinced, because I just feel like it would be such a good setup.
I know what you mean,
but
I
don't trust it.
I cannot exaggerate too much how much they'd be backpedaling to do that. They've gone so far down the route of having you and your gang just constantly defending this as a tactic. And I don't know, maybe you're right, maybe they will go back. It's hard to say.
We've brought games to this that are ideologically correct in quite distinct ways, haven't we? You've brought one that's narratively very ideologically correct. I've brought one which I'm arguing like the gameplay is ideologically correct, and you've got one where the sort of theme and the background, it's not explicit in the text that it's ideologically correct, but it's very obvious when you read into it properly. So I'd just like to pat ourselves on the back here a little bit.
We are great. We are great. We are great.
So if I had to choose between the two of your games, which seems like a good way of doing it, I think I'll go with Still Wakes the Deep. Sorry, I'm making eye contact with Alex right now.
It's all right.
I just...
Betrayal. Betrayal.
No, I mean...
oh man, that knife really hurt to my back.
All right, I take it back. No. I think games that communicate metaphorically I find more compelling and more effective, and it's very difficult to walk that back. I get, it's unfair for me to criticize this game for what a potential future game might do. But we've been burnt too many times before on the left. So
the terrible truth I've been hiding from you is that the non-political elements of Rebirth, they did wildly backtrack on things set up in the first game. That's the sad truth. Alex. That's why it may not be my actual game of the year, but politically it is very good.
You're a liar and a fraud, Alexander.
Sorry. Also to add on, I'm not to defend my own game, but it's interesting that you're like, oh, they shove it so far down your throat that they are like terrorist group, not necessarily bad, corporation bad, where I just feel like, I don't know, I do prefer a more, not subtle approach, because I do think the message should be clear, and that's kind of what I like about Still Wakes the Deep, is that it is so clear, it's very obvious. I think you would have a very hard time playing it and getting any other message out of it, sure. But also it's just a cosmic horror. It's like so Lovecraftian, but like without all the bad bits, without all the racism and bad shit that Lovecraft does, you know? Yeah. So I'm biased because I do love psychological horror as a way to sort of externalize things that we're big sort of hyper objects that we're afraid of. And I just think it does that really well in terms of climate, but it's just so I think for me, the Final Fantasy, it almost sounds frustrating how direct it is, I guess, which like I say that not only about Final Fantasy, but I've gotten frustrated by games that do that in the past as well, like other games where I'm like, okay, again, all right, okay, you're super woke, what do you want me to say?
I mean, I would say this isn't like I would say there are games where they do something that is, I mean, quote unquote woke, and you can tell they're like, they've got their patting themselves on their back and they're being almost a little bit smug about it. They're like, it's too on the nose, and like, I'm in support of them doing it, but I always think they could have done that a bit more, with a bit more subtlety and a bit more style. But with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Remake, while they're explicit about it, they are just like full on the excesses of the corporate state cannot be tolerated any further. Direct action is the only answer. They are pretty. They aren't smug about it. They're saying things that are absolutely not within the range of, like, I think we're going to talk about this a bit with the Game Awards, when corporations went all in on BLM and they gave the most kind of cloying, insubstantial support, and then the moment they were needed to actually act on any of that, all that support evaporated. This isn't really like that. This is just outright going for the true kind of core of it. And I mean, I guess we'll have to see for the third game if they actually follow through. Sofie, what would you say out of mine and Ed's games would you'd go with? Was it Frostpunk? I think you guys.
Yeah, I think definitely Frostpunk. I just think I'm really a big fan of games that use the medium of games really strongly. As stupid as that sounds, but like, I love the Walking Dead video game for that reason, in terms of, I think it could be nothing but a game.
The Telltale
game.
Yeah.
Obviously, it is a TV show and it is bad. But like the story that the Walking Dead video game, the Telltale game tells, could not be anything else but a game. It wouldn't work as a novel. It wouldn't work as a movie. Mm-hmm. And I kind of probably feel that same way about the way you're describing Frostpunk. It sounds to me like it could not possibly function as a movie or a TV show. It uses the fact that it's a game as an instructive sort of manual, I guess, for like organizing, and this sort of I love that. I think like Still Wakes the Deep I would read that. I would read the shit out of it. Oh my god, I would love that as a book, or a movie or a TV show. I don't think it necessarily uses the medium of a game as well as it sounds like Frostpunk uses.
Well, as much as it pains me, I would probably say that my choice out of Ed and Sophie's games would also be Ed's. So I'm convinced. Very forceful argument was made.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, what an honor.
Not even from 2024.
I think we have
2024 game most ideologically correct.
We have no choice. We have no choice but to award number. We have no choice but to award our most ideologically correct 2024 game award to Frostpunk, open brackets, 2018, close brackets.
If it had to be 2024, it would be mine. Be my game. It would be Still Wakes the Deep.
Well, frankly, we'll have to leave that up as a theoretical exercise for the listener.
We'll revisit when the next Final Fantasy VII comes out.
That's true. That's true. We'll do. I'm feeling depressed now. You brought elements of doubt in my mind, and I'm thinking, and I worry it's going to drop the ball now.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
No.
Sure, it'll be fine.
Well, okay, and now having resolved the most burning question of all leftists of the year, it's done. We're now moving on to the news, and there is only one real. Well, it's a large. Let's call it a meta news, a big old chunk of news, which was the annual Game Awards, an ideologically incorrect award ceremony that happened a few nights ago, famously presented by Jeff Keighley, and this was the 10th anniversary, although before that he did the basically identical VGAs, which is the Video Game Awards.
That was the really problematic one with the hot women, right? With like the naked women.
I mean, probably at some point.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. The bikini women.
I mean, I'm sure they did that at some point. That's the way. That's the way. Like E3 and a lot of these events used to be. So.
I think the YouTuber Eddie Burbank's got quite a good video on that.
That's the video that I watched. That is exactly the video I watched.
I've not seen that one. I guess I can recommend.
Go watch
that,
it.
Right?
It's very good.
I'll check it out. But yeah, it used to be that, but now but now it's I don't know, slightly more reputable. Though, as we'll get into, still not terribly reputable version. So we're going to go through this chronologically, and we'll talk about some of the controversies and so on that came up. But also, this award ceremony, it's basically just a giant commercial. And the main thing they really do is show off trailers for games and announce games and so on. So
can I also, sorry, just
go for it.
You mentioned the format, right? It's just this first time I've ever actually watched the Game Awards. Not a huge award ceremony person. I think none of us probably are. And I was just baffled as to like the format of it, where it would just be like these lengthy ad segments, obviously these lengthy premieres, and then it would be like, the winner of this one was this, the winner of that one was that.
Yeah,
just like
very
in
short.
like 5 seconds, and I was like baffled by it.
Well, this is the way it does annoy me sometimes when game journalists or something are astonished by this, because it's literally been like this for 10 years. That's the way it is. We'll kind of talk about this. I tell you what, let's just get straight into the controversy instead of talking about the actual games that are announced. We can get into those because there are some cool, interesting ones. But basically, there was a big controversy last year. Well, let's go back 2 years. 2 years ago, in the, I think the Best Performance Award, the guy who plays Kratos, or does the voice for him, in God of War, used to be in Stargate SG-1, the TV show. I think his name's Christopher Judge?
I believe you.
I think that's right. He gave...
50% confidence?
He gave a speech which was... Oh, thank you. I'm getting a thumbs up from Ed. He gave a speech that was comically long. It went on forever. Like they started playing music, he just plowed on straight through.
This is
it.
the previous one, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I was like,
no. This was 2 years. This is the context for what. This was 2 years ago. Okay. It was, and it completely threw the timings of the rest of the show off. And so the following year, last year, they clearly wanted to kind of correct for that and make sure that didn't happen again. And as a result, they had very harsh limits on how long developers could give their speeches for.
I think I've actually heard about that. Yeah.
After they received their awards. Worst of all was Sven Vinky, sorry, who was the head of Larian, which made Baldur's Gate 3, which was the game of the year last year. It won that award. And he went up and he started giving a speech, and he started like talking about some of his colleagues who'd sadly died, and they start playing the music like wildly early.
Yikes.
But yeah, so basically everyone was really pissed off with the Game Awards last year. So this year there was clearly an attempt to kind of course correct. They had they gave the speakers a lot longer to talk. Sven Vinky came out at the end and to present the game of the year, and he gave quite a long speech and even joked about it. And they had the two Muppets, Statler and Waldorf, come out.
Baffling.
They were basically there to slag off the show and to kind of ameliorate this criticism from previously.
Get it. Baffling though.
And to be honest, it's pretty funny. There was a good joke about how Jeff Keighley, the presenter of the Game Awards, is weirdly obsessed with Hideo Kojima.
I laughed at that.
That was a good joke.
It gets quite boring though when people constantly make jokes about themselves rather than like actually improve themselves. It reminds me of like when The Simpsons got really, really bad and they kept making loads of jokes about how bad it was. It's like, yeah, all right, well, write better jokes then.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I thought, a fairly transparent attempt to diffuse the criticism by saying, hey, look, yeah, we know we've sold out. We know it's 3 hours of ads. We know it's too long and everyone thinks that.
It's not actually addressing the criticism though.
Well, exactly.
It's very sneaky.
But the kind of big thing that happened was the so-called Game Changer Award.
Yes.
So this is
first ever.
It was the first ever, but it's actually slightly more complicated now.
Oh.
Because in previous years they've had what I believe they called the Future Class, where they would have these videos that showcased a selection of young game makers who were in some sort of social justice reasoning behind them. You know, I'm making the first video game from Afghanistan or something, or I'm a trans woman and I'm making a game, like a young trans woman, they're all young, making a game about my experiences or something like that. Things along those lines, right? And these were in very kind of like corporate friendly, they're good. I don't want to criticize anyone who did these or anything, but they were also kind of very much of what we were talking about before, kind of corporations coming out in favor of BLM, that sort of thing. Now, that was cancelled this year. That didn't happen this year. And no one's there. I don't believe there's an official reason. However, most people have kind of assumed that it's because last year a bunch of the Future Class people came out and wanted to have some sort of statement made in solidarity with Palestine. Oh. And they were never going to do that.
Okay.
So it seems that they basically just cancelled the entire program to kind of get around
and replaced it with something else. That's great.
And replaced it with this.
I didn't know that. That's grim.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. But in this time, they announced a Game Changer Award. Now, another thing that they were criticized for. So last year they had a pretty bad year overall. That Future Class was another thing. There was the fact people weren't allowed to talk, but there was also the fact that there was no statement or mention about all the big layoffs that have happened in the games industry, or had happened at that point last year. And a lot of people were upset about this. So this was clearly their attempt to deal with that. So Jeff came up on stage, and I have actually transcribed his speech. And he said, "Now, the sad reality is that over the past few years, the gaming industry has suffered significant and unprecedented industry-wide layoffs. Those affect the games we get to play, and even more importantly, the people who make the games we love. We can debate and certainly disagree with the reasons why, and honestly, as a show, we kind of struggle with how to address these topics in a constructive way. But this year, inside of those challenges, we found greatness. I'm proud to share with you the story of a single individual who saw developers in need and did something truly extraordinary." Well, so the big issue there, I think, is we can debate and certainly disagree with the reasons why.
I kind of wanted to interrupt you there and say boo, but I was trying to be polite.
So I will say, just before we get into this, the person he introduced, the single individual, is this guy called Amir Satvat, who is a kind of middle-aged man who has apparently started like this little community. It seems like it kind of started off as basically just an Excel spreadsheet that people added their names to, and he helped them see if they could find jobs. These are people who have been laid off, and I think it's expanded a lot further beyond that. His website is quite extensive. I checked it out. And this guy seems like a perfectly nice guy, and a guy deserving of praise. I will say that there was a story that came out just this morning when we were recording that apparently he has... I
said, uh-oh.
Yeah. No, he has apparently, inevitably just received a lot of abuse and death threats and stuff.
That's a different kind of uh-oh.
Yeah, it's no. There's not a dark secret about him. From as far as I can tell.
I thought you were going.
No, there's nothing like that. But basically, because he came out, and I think, genuinely, I think one of the reasons he got hate was because in the little video package they did about him, they showed some of the developers he helped, and one of them was a woman with blue hair.
And, also, he's brown, so
yeah, and he's a person of color. So I think a lot of that just gets all the biggest idiots on the internet to obsess over him. So he's seems like a good guy who deserves plaudits. Certainly doesn't deserve any kind of hate or abuse.
Solidarity from the Red Barrels.
Yeah, solidarity with Amir Satvat. Yeah. Even if his actual day job is that he's a business manager for Tencent, which isn't the most humble and working class of positions. But he seems like he's a good guy. But the issue is that Jeff Keighley and the bunch of them went incredibly far out of their way to avoid having even the smallest amount of criticism for the actual corporations and game companies and publishers who have actually caused those layoffs. Theoretically, if they were going to do this game changer, if I was running the Game Awards and I wanted to do this award, I would give it to someone organizing the game union they have.
Yeah, 100%.
The CWA, I believe.
Yeah, when they first sort of introduced the story, I was quite disappointed by the trajectory of the story.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, Amir's great guy, did a good thing, not denying that, but I actually thought it was going to be like a mutual aid story, and in the beginning it kind of was, where it was like, I collected all these people who'd lost their job, and then it just became like a job center plus, essentially, where it's just like, you can send your applications and here's how to write a CV and stuff.
It took this structural issue and then dealt with it in the most individualistic, like one specific person being charitable and nice kind of way.
They literally said, "I'm proud to share with you the story of a single individual."
Yeah, exactly. Literally one individual
who saw developers in need.
No unionizing. No collectives.
It just really. I talked about this a little bit on the last episode we did. Just went back through my head thinking of all the episodes we've done. Yeah, it was the last one.
Yeah.
And
one successor to that episode.
One of our better ones, I
thought. I think it's easily in the top 10 of the episodes we've made.
Top 2, I'm just going to say it.
Top 2, actually.
Wow, big praise. And I said, I think there's a lot of people fundamentally don't understand what the Game Awards are. And what the Game Awards are 3.5 hours of advertisements. And that is literally the business model that they operate under. There was a story that came out this summer because Jeff Keighley also does Summer Games Fest, and there's a little show attached to that. And that's basically like the Game Awards, but without any awards. It's just game trailers and so on. So I guess it's a little bit more honest about what it is. But people were shocked to find out that it costs like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get your game shown on these things. Yeah. And that includes the Game Awards. And
how many workers' jobs could that have paid
for?
I
mean, I don't want to. I mean, I'm sure the games would sell more if they're on the thing. I mean, of all the examples of money being taken away from the workers, I wouldn't really count that among them. But
well, I mean, I guess typically game devs don't get paid after the game's published.
Sure,
they get paid.
I mean, they ostensibly they're supposed to get royalties, but they're famously don't actually receive them.
I'm gonna level that criticism actually.
Thank you, Sophie.
Well, the game isn't usually out by the time that event happens. Look, I don't want to be defending Jeff Keighley's
Finding awfully defensive of Jeff Keighley at the moment.
Number one Jeff Keighley fan here. This is the Jeff Keighley podcast.
We love him.
But no, people don't appreciate that the point. Every single element of the Game Awards is an advert. Obviously, the literal adverts that they have are adverts.
I think a lot of people do appreciate that. I
don't think they do, because the adverts are adverts. The world premiere trailers are adverts, but also the musical performances are adverts.
I think a lot of people do know that.
But the awards are also adverts.
I think a lot of people know that.
I know, because a lot of people complain. When people complain that like, oh, I can't believe it's all ads. Where are the awards? I mean, the awards are also ads. The reason the Game Awards exist is so that people might watch them and think, oh, this game was nominated for Game of the Year. I might go buy it.
I don't think there's a lot of people baffled by that. I think that it definitely is like a valid criticism. I think we can criticize it for that in terms of just being like, oh, it does feel very commercial, but like, I think most people are aware that it's just ads. Like, I knew, never having watched one, I was like, oh, I know from just general discourse about the Game Awards that it is just 3 hours of ads.
That's because the discourse is almost entirely what games were announced there, what games were shown there.
Are the Oscars just ads?
I would say so. I think that there are two types of like award ceremony, right? There's like, I don't know, Plumber of the Year, which is basically for the plumbing industry to have a nice night out in a ballroom somewhere. I suppose most generously you might say it's to promote excellence in plumbing or something. But like no one really cares other than maybe the guy who wins might put that on in the windshield of his van or something. But then you've got things like the Oscars or the Grammys or the BAFTAs. These are commercial events that they want people to go see because they want people to buy the products that win the awards or at least are nominated. That is the entire point of those things. And so when people expect Jeff Keighley to come out and say the games industry is corrupt, desperately needs unionizing, that's not going
rise up, comrades.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I'd love it if it did happen, but it's never going to happen. He's never going to come in and promote the games union. He's never going to say free Palestine. The entire event exists for the purpose of what the people who fund it want, and the people who fund it are the game companies who pay for it. And if there was any serious criticism of them in the Games Awards, certainly from within the awards themselves, like from Jeff Keighley and what he's organizing, then they might take that money away. Now, there was a little bit of criticism in the award ceremony, but that came from, we mentioned him a few times, Sven Vinke, who runs Larian, and came in at the end, as I mentioned, to present the Game of the Year. And because he got cut off last time, he clearly had the kind of political capital to go up and talk for 3 minutes and say whatever he liked. And so what he said did have some actual criticism. I'll read some of it here. I mean, basically, he kind of went into this kind of metaphor about he went to see an oracle who would tell him who would win the future games of the year. And she told him it would be like a game that does all these things, that is like made with passion and so on. But it includes the studio that made that game, the one that would win in the future. Maybe because they wanted to make a game that they wanted to play themselves. They created it because it hadn't been created before. They didn't make it to increase market share. They didn't make it to serve as a brand. They didn't have to meet arbitrary sales targets or fear being laid off if they didn't meet those targets. Now, furthermore, the people in charge forbade them from cramming the game with anything whose purpose was to increase revenue and didn't serve the game design. They didn't treat their developers like numbers on a spreadsheet. They didn't treat their players as users to exploit, and they didn't make decisions they knew were short-sighted in function of a bonus or politics. Not sure about the politics thing. I think that I think that may have been a vague kind of sop to people who are upset about there being politics in games, which obviously our entire podcasting is predicated on the idea that they should be. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think it's fine if he puts politics in his game, as long as they are good and woke politics, obviously.
Only woke politics allowed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, he's highlighting a tension we're all quite familiar with there, right? That there's the incentive is to maximize profit, and that often goes against wanting to make a good game. There are so many things we can point to in the games industry which exclusively exist to make money, and basically a lot of people basically hate. So yeah. I don't know, is that the kind of thing that would win a game award?
Well, what do you mean would win a game award?
I mean, is the kind of game that wins the game awards, game of the year sort of thing, are they actually the best games or like very strong games, or are they more likely, you've pointed out how corporately influenced they are. Do they sort of...
Well, the games are actually voted on by basically the games media. As I mentioned, if we can get big in our podcast, we might be on that jury. Considering how much we just complained about Game Awards, probably not. But other groups, game websites, various other outlets, and so on, media people, they vote on it. So they tend not to be too. I think, for instance, next year, if it was purely corporate, GTA 6 would win Game of the Year. Now, it might win Game of the Year, but I don't think it's a dead cert by any stretch of the imagination. So I think the actual awards themselves are relatively kind of legit in how they're voted. I think there's issues. A lot of people are complaining. We talked about it last time about DLC getting nominated and so on. But there are issues like that. But they aren't wildly corporate. I mean, the winner of Game of the Year this year was Astrobot, which is a great little game. There have been issues people have complained about because there's the whole way through the game, there are all these little cameos from other games, games Sony either publishes or has had like relations with in the past, are like associated with PlayStation consoles, and so it does have a bit of a kind of corporate sheen on it, but it is a game made with a huge amount of love, and they seem like good guys, so I'm pretty happy with that personally.
I've actually asked for that game for Christmas.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Thanks, Mum.
Well, they haven't given it to you. They could desperately let you down.
Surely you wouldn't do that to me, Mum. I think if you list things that people hate about the current games industry, so many of those things exclusively exist to maximize shareholder value, right? We're talking about crunch for game workers. We're talking about, I don't know, pay to win cash shops and stuff like that. That's not been put into games because anyone, loot boxes, zero people are there thinking, now this is going to make the game better. They're there thinking, this is going to make the game more profitable, and we have to include that in our game.
Yeah.
Or stuff where there's like cut content from games, like where people have like obviously they've put something in a game and then decided to cut it out so they can sell it back to you later as a DLC.
Yeah.
So I think probably all of us were there thinking. I mean, I completely agree with this thing that you're highlighting, which is there's a real tension between making money and being a good video game.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I was going to add on to that just like, I think that's kind of why I felt, and I think a lot of people felt this way. It was Baldur's Gate winning Game of the Year last year felt like kind of a coup, honestly, because like,
they were definitely
extremely
underdogs.
Successful. It's an underdog, but like it's extremely successful and good because of the amount of time and creativity and expansiveness that the game has, and it is also it's pretty based as well. It's like, not super leftist, but like it's very gay. It's the gayest game for a long time. It's really, really gay for like a mainstream title. And yeah, it felt like kind of such a coup because, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Baldur's Gate came out and the reviews started rolling in. I specifically remember there were other dev studios that were like, why did you do this? Now people will hold us to a higher standard. There was like genuinely, I think, like a published piece of writing from another dev studio, which is just like kind of saying like, well, this is going to result in worse crunch because you're holding games to such a high standard.
I'm not sure if it was published. I'd kind of I
forget how, but it was like a public thing.
I wouldn't want to talk too authoritatively because I can't remember for sure, but I think that may have been somewhat exaggerated that another studio came out and said that. I think there were, like, maybe it was some guy on Twitter who makes a game. I don't think it was like a...
Which, honestly, I think still valid, because I think that's probably what they were thinking. Even if that's not what they were saying, I think that's probably what they were thinking.
Sure. I think it's been very canny by certain people on the left. I think they're right to do it kind of strategically, to kind of link the struggle of workers in the games industry to things like loot boxes, gambling, pay to win, that kind of thing that everyone hates, and in a way to kind of get gamers on side. So I think it's a good idea, but to be totally honest, I'm not really sure how true it is. I could very easily imagine a company that has actually really great employee conditions, and pay, but they can achieve that because they make a lot of money through microtransactions or whatever,
I mean, it's a structural issue, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
even if you're like a bunch of really good people, it will be the case in a lot of situations that doing something kind of shitty like that will be more profitable for you. Like, that's just could well be just an objective fact, and like what you choose to do with that is difficult. But over the long run, if you don't go down the most profitable route, you're much less likely to survive as a game company and not be bought up or shut down. We see that happen so much in the games industry. Mm-hmm. So for me, what's interesting is how do games like, I don't know, I haven't played it, but like Baldur's Gate 3, how do they happen, and can they continue to happen? Like the context where we see games that are just really good and haven't gone down this predatory thing, that's more remarkable to me than the opposite, than predatory games.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, just to be clear, those microtransactions, etc., they're all terrible, and they are absolutely a symptom of these giant corporations. Just in general, their overall plan is just to wring as much money out of everyone as they possibly can, be that their employees and or the gamers. But I'm just saying those aren't inherently and directly connected. It would be possible for those things to, for one to be fine and the other to be terrible. I don't think they're necessarily connected, but I do think it's a good idea for tactically to connect these things, because it does help the cause.
I think they're necessarily connected in that the root of both of them is capitalism.
That's true,
right?
Of course.
So
yes.
when you're thinking about it on that level,
it's the root of all evil.
It's the root of basically all the problems in the games industry, and indeed
the world,
all industry. So I think it makes sense to do it strategically. I agree, but also like from a theoretical point of view, I agree. But I do think your point is correct. Like within the confines of capitalism, there could still be a tension where like a worker-run cooperative or whatever decides to include predatory practices because it just objectively will make them more money. And they, competition is a disciplining force. You've got to. You got to do what you got to do. The people that make games, like the games companies, the shareholders, the investors, they're not necessarily evil people. That's not the point. The point is the structures require them to act in a way which makes the games we want to play worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. Shall we talk about some of the actual games that were shown?
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's roll. So probably the big thing, the first big thing that came up was The Witcher 4, as showcased on. It had a little thing at the bottom that said it was pre-rendered on a future unannounced NVIDIA RTX chipset, which is just one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. But it did look very nice, but I suspect we won't be playing it for a long time, and maybe not even on like a PlayStation 5. But did either of you have a look at that and have any thoughts on that? I'm a pretty big fan of The Witcher, so I am looking forward to it.
I did write, it was one of the very few thoughts that I wrote down, because I write down a lot of thoughts, which is that I will probably play The Witcher 4, because I feel like I've missed every single Witcher entry point. Like, I've never played every...
You not played 3?
Not played 3. I tried it, and I just didn't really like it very much, but I do think that it kind of had aged at that point, to the point where I just didn't really enjoy how it played.
Yeah.
Specifically, I played it after I played Red Dead Redemption, and the horse mechanics just drove me insane. Red Dead 2. I played it after Red Dead 2, and I was like, I hate this horse so much. I hate riding this horse.
It's Roach. Everyone loves Roach.
But it controls so badly. It's like the Mako from Mass Effect.
I mean, basically, you play The Witcher 3 anyway for like exploring and the story and the characters and stuff. The actual fighting is not great.
I'll probably play 4.
I remember that came out the same year as Bloodborne, and that was kind of like the dichotomy. It was like Bloodborne completely destroyed it in action.
I mean, I loved The Witcher 3 when that came out. I maybe played it a couple of years after it came out, and I haven't yet played Red Dead 2, so maybe that will retroactively ruin
well, they're pretty different games. They just have horses. They just
it's so bad.
It's full of horseplay.
Oh!
Yeah. So you'll go, Alex. Stop! I'll laugh so much I'll get horse. Right. Witcher 4. I'm definitely hyped for Witcher 4 because I really, really enjoyed Witcher 3. I thought we talked last time about what makes a good RPG, and I think The Witcher 3 hits a bunch of those notes for me.
Yeah, it's great.
Did you notice? Have you seen any of the backlash that's happened as a result?
Oh, she's
of course.
as soon as
ugly and a woman.
As soon as she took off her hood, it was like, oh, Ciri is you play as Ciri, and she's a bit older and not quite as pretty. And you're like, oh man, like literally, I saw people
I think she's smoking. I don't really. She doesn't look. It's such a classic gamer thing where they just love.
Love
bringing down hot women
but by any realistic standard, she's an attractive woman.
Yeah.
But she's not less girlish than she was in the first game.
She's a woman.
Because she's not really a girl anymore.
An adult woman. Stop.
I know, but that's the reason. But like literally, I mean, I could see everyone knew the moment that a woman's walking around. I was like, oh my god, that's gonna be such a weird edge. Similarly, at the end of the show, they showed the new Naughty Dog game called Galactic, which stars a bald woman, and like as soon as you saw that, they're gonna say the same thing, saying things. It's just the weirdest thing ever.
Also, again, a smoking character.
Yeah, she's perfectly pretty, but
fine.
This is what makes it difficult to follow games as like a socialist or as a progressive person. Like I didn't watch the Game Awards live; I watched the replay of it, and you start seeing stuff like vibes on the internet, like people angry about The Witcher 4, and you have to be like, is this a real thing to be angry about, or is this some people who just hate women or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, it's difficult to discern without having to sit through a 4-hour awards show. So please tone it down so I don't have to watch the Game Awards again in future. People who are being angry about it.
If you're staying on the podcast, you're gonna have to watch it again next year. That's what we're all locked in for the rest of our lives.
Stream next year. Fucking let's make it a drinking game.
It was in the contracts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there was also the other kind of big game, the big kind of final huge reveal was the reveal of an Akami sequel.
Yes, yeah.
Do you guys play or know the original Akami?
But
I've never played it, but I know about it. When I was a kid, I only had Nintendo consoles.
Oh, yeah.
And Akami was on the Wii.
It's on the Wii, yeah.
I used to watch a lot of YouTubers that exclusively reviewed Wii games, and this was so I watched a lot of reviews of Akami, so I sort of feel like I've played it, but I haven't actually got around to playing it yet, but I would like to. I mean,
it's a great game. I mean, it certainly looks amazing. It's got a beautiful art style. It's kind of long-winded, and like there's this one boss that you basically that's quite long, and you end up fighting it like I think literally 3 or 4 times, and it's just identical every time. They just reuse it. I'm like, seriously, am I fighting this thing again? Okay, right.
As I remember, all the reviews said it was quite Zelda-esque.
It's basically it's totally a Zelda game where you play as a dog, basically.
Count me in.
But the big thing that happened with it, and the big announcement was that not only is there a new Akami game, but it's going to be made by Hideaki.
Yes, yeah.
Is it Hideki? No, it's Hideki Kamiya, who he's like an interesting guy. He originally made Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation 2, and then
Resident Evil.
Yes, and then he made Devil May Cry.
No,
I don't think he said that. And then basically he kind of started his own like mini company internally within Capcom called Clover, and he made a bunch of like very imaginative games like Beautiful Joe and the original Akami, and then he got fired under acrimonious circumstances and went and started or like co-started Platinum Games, and then he recently left there under somewhat acrimonious circumstances, and he's literally spent the last year just doing videos on YouTube about how he's unemployed. And then 1 week before the Game Awards, he put out a video about how he's unemployed. And then they announced this. So I was like, this game's, I think, pretty early.
Sure, yeah.
So we're not going to be playing it for quite a long time. But it's pretty cool. And he's also starting a new studio that it's literally called Clovers. plural.
See what they did there.
So it's a very obvious callback to that. So it's a nice return to a kind of a nice time in video games. It's worth pointing out that Shinji Mikami, who made the original Resident Evil, you don't have to do the voice this time, and a bunch of other games. He also recently surprisingly left his game company. So I think it's quite likely he's going to come join Clover's because he worked there back in the day. But that should be fun. Naughty Dog's game looks okay. It looks pretty cool, I guess.
I'm interested in a new property.
Yeah, it's nice they're doing something
I'm always
new.
excited for a new property, I'll be honest.
It's got a weird thing where it appears to be set in the future, but it's full of 80s technology and also
I'm a sucker
brands.
for 80s stuff. Like, I'm a sucker for it.
As am I, but it's
the
also
brand placement is obnoxious.
The brands is weird.
Concerning.
I mean, yeah, like the spaceship is a Porsche.
Yes, very concerning.
And she's got Adidas shoes on and a few other things.
But it's hard to bet against Naughty Dog at this stage, isn't it? I mean, the last game that they released that isn't considered like a classic is like Jack X Combat Racing on the PlayStation 2 in 2005.
It's true.
It's like at least a 20-year streak.
Yeah.
So,
well,
I'd like to play.
I think Uncharted 3 is not very good, to be honest.
The thing is, I saw it and I was like, oh, I'll probably almost definitely play that.
Yeah, it is directed by Neil Druckmann, who is, I believe, The Last of Us 2 apparently had very bad working conditions to make it, but also Neil Druckmann is at least something of a Zionist.
Oh yeah, I mean, Last of Us is explicitly.
Well, I think it's I think Last of Us 2 is like, I don't think it's outright Zionist, or I think it's
the zombies are Palestinians.
No, the zombies aren't Palestinians.
The zombies are Palestinians.
The zombies aren't Palestinians. There is a group in the game that are literally Palestinians. Well, they're not literally, but they're not the zombies. They're like the cultists. They're the Palestinians, and the WLF are the Israelis. That's the analogy being made. Okay. But I think the analogy is more, oh man, they just keep fighting forever. Man, it's just an eternal cycle of violence, which is kind of like a shitty lib version of Israel-Palestinian conflict circa a few years ago. I don't think it's explicitly about that. I think it's kind of inspired by that.
I could be fact-checked on this, but I'm pretty sure there's like an article where there is a quote where there's someone who says, yes, it is explicitly about that.
He talked about it. He said that it was inspired by that. Well, but I think no. I think there is a difference. I think what he was saying was, I was inspired by the eternal cycle of violence, quote unquote, of Israel-Palestine to do my story about an eternal cycle of violence. I don't think it was directly a comment on that. But whatever, we'll see, I guess. There was also a new Virtua Fighter. That looked interesting, good for them. But I think that's pretty much it, really, from the Game Awards. And
were there any specific games that either of you are really hyped about that we haven't named so far?
Oh, I think Sophie's really excited about Catly.
What the fuck is Catly? Literally, okay, let me show you. I've written not very many notes. One of them is, what the fuck is... Well, it says Carly, but it was supposed to be Catly. What the fuck is Catly?
I can confirm she's got 4 lines, for 4 notes, and one of them is that. A full 25% of her Game Wars experience.
What the fuck is Catly?
My favourite thing about Catly was the implication by what it said at the end, that you'll be able to play that game on an Apple iWatch. Which I have.
Because not only obviously it looks like it's made by AI, which side note, I do feel like a lot of people are equating bad with made by AI, and those two are not the same thing. But I do think it does look very AI, just in the terms of galaxy eyes, and the color scheme is just very AI. But also it doesn't tell you anything. It's literally just cats running around. It's what the fuck?
AI looking
I love
cats.
Stray. I'm not opposed to a game about cats, but what are we doing here?
I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of people just assumed it was AI because it does seem to have a very similar kind of very garish AI-esque.
It's that shade
style
of pink, man.
Yeah,
it's that very specific shade of pink that's just such a dead giveaway for AI. I swear to God.
If it ends up being playable on Apple Watches, Todd Howard is going to be backstage rubbing his hands.
He did it. Oh, by the way, did anyone notice how incredibly short Todd Howard turned out to be?
He's so short.
I couldn't believe that. I
was like, is that Todd Howard?
I was like, this is why he always comes out alone.
I'm not going to lie, I've watched the behind-the-scenes making of Elder Scrolls 4 and 5, so I was well aware of the situation with Todd Howard's height.
I guess I'd forgotten it.
Short King, I don't know.
He's not a short king.
No,
He's
I know.
not a
I'm
king.
joking. I'm joking.
Don't give him that.
There is a game. Sorry, there was an Outer Worlds 2.
Outer Worlds 2, yes.
Which I'm looking forward to because I did like Outer Worlds the original, but it felt too short.
Yeah, I like
in like a bad way, not like in a I need more. I was just like, this seems weirdly cut off.
Yeah, that's true. It was definitely too short. I enjoyed it. Maybe one day we'll talk about the politics, but not today because we're 2 hours into recording this podcast.
Also, a game with good politics. So I'm excited for an Outer Worlds 2.
Yeah, Outer Worlds 2 is definitely one of the games I was most hyped about, with Witcher 4 as well, and another one. Say no more.
Another game, just a mystery game.
Should have decided what the fuck is Catly. Mine's much more concise.
Yeah. Along with the split fiction game by Hazelight.
Yeah. Have you played the It Takes Two?
Wow, it's funny you should ask that, Alex. My girlfriend and I are currently playing It Takes Two. She got it for me for my birthday, which was very recently.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Tgoing guys. Really appreciate that.
I'm going to keep that pause in.
And we're having a really good time. I mean, my only concern with split fiction is we quite like the cute vibe of It Takes Two. It's quite a nice, sweet, coupley.
It did seem a lot more generic visually.
Yeah, it did.
But it looks nice. It looks pretty cool, I think.
But yeah, so I mean, there are quite a few games I was excited to play.
Yeah.
Which I guess is all that really needs to happen from the Game Awards.
Yeah. I mean, as much as I sagged off the Game Awards, ultimately, I am not above...
Jeff Keighley fans coming out now.
I am not above watching 3.5 hours of ads. I've seen so many E3 press conferences and stuff, and some of these shows are better than others, and I thought this was a pretty good one. Oh, Fumito Ueda, who made Eco and Shadow of the Colossus, finally a new game.
Yes, I saw that. I was interested in that. I've never played. Well, I think I played Shadow of the Colossus a little bit as a child, but it has a special place in my heart. So it's one of those games where I'm like, I don't know if I'll play that, but I will watch the fuck out of somebody else playing that. I look forward to that.
You should play all three of them, including The Last Guardian. It's difficult to play that for some reason. It only came out on the PS4, and it's a very kind of bad version. They never put out an updated one with 60 FPS or anything. I reckon they're fantastic games, and they're very easy to play. They're not overwhelming. They're not.
That's not my concern. I think I just I don't know. I was just like, it's just one of those games where I was just like, I felt more drawn to watching people play it. Maybe it's because I never played it myself because I used to watch my brother play it. Little Soflaw there. So I feel like it's very nostalgic for me to watch a game like that. So
I've also never played it, and I also have a sort of feeling of nostalgia about it. So I think it's just something about, specifically Shadow of Colossus.
Yeah.
There's just something about the vibe of that game which makes you feel sort of nostalgic. There's a sort of sadness to it.
There's a real melancholy. It's got this huge open world that is purposefully empty, which is kind of incredible.
Beautiful use of limited resources. Fantastic.
And also there was a spin-off for Elden Ring that is
yes, the multiplayer, right?
Yeah, it's a multiplayer thing.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable for them to do, but it seems like a pretty obvious, just they've got all these assets, they could make money forever on
Elden Ring. Sorry.
more like Elden Wrong. Am I right now?
I'm sure that joke hasn't been made before. Yeah, Elden Ring's just like a cash cow. It's gonna keep on giving. So I'm like, fair, okay.
Yeah, I remember I was watching the trailer and I was like, but this looks like Elden Ring, but all the actual creativity removed. And if that's what they want to do and just make some money.
Yeah, I would rather they did that than actively undermine Elden Ring. They've not added a cash shop to Elden Ring or whatever.
Yeah.
I'd rather.
They've said that it's a completely separate world and story. It's not connected to the original anyway. Dark Souls enemies turned up. The nameless king was a boss from Dark Souls. It's just there, and it's just it's kind of. It seems like I don't know, a cash grab, but in a good way. It's just I'll get paid. No one's
for the fans.
People, I'm sure people enjoy it, so go for it. But it's not really what I look to those games for. So I probably won't bother with it myself. And I think that's it for today's episode of the Red Barrels podcast. I do hope you have a lovely Christmas period, a lovely Hanukkah, and a lovely New Year. All the holidays, we support them all, and we hope you have a good one. We'll be back in January, hopefully with more regular podcasts. We'll see going forward, but we'd love to have you come along with us. There's 3 of us here. We all have social media stuff. And Ed, I want to hear what yours are.
Yeah, well, thanks for listening, everyone. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. In the interim, in the terrible drought between podcasts, you can find me at Not a Lemon on Blue Sky, and all the Blue Sky stuff after at Not a Lemon. And you can find me on the artist formerly known as Twitter, X, at Still Not a Lemon.
Still Not a Lemon.
All one word.
Congratulations on getting Not a Lemon. Getting in there on Blue Sky. You couldn't do it on Twitter, but you managed to get there early on Blue Sky. Well done.
Yeah. Sophie.
Yeah, have a happy and safe holiday season. You can find me on twitch.tv/SoFreely. You can also follow my music on Spotify. Just search So Freely, I think. Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday season. We'll see you in the new year.
I'm a little worried you're not sure that your music's
I'm
up on
not
Spotify.
sure. Well, because it is there. It is there, but like my SEO is really bad.
Oh,
so if you search So Freely, you might just come up
I'm
with a
fairly
song
sure
that says
I found it. And
So
it was on...
Freely. No, it's one word. It's one word.
It's all one word. It's all So Freely.
So Freely won it all. Also, YouTube, So Freely Media.
Well done. And I'm on both Twitter and Blue Sky under Alex Dean, ALEXDUIN. Please give me a follow. And also follow our podcast feed, which is, I believe, on Twitter, it's a Red Barrels Pod, because they wouldn't let me have all the characters for podcast.
Great.
And on Blue Sky, it's Red Barrels Podcast. And if you just go on there, you can see when the next episode's coming out. And I don't know, maybe we'll post some other stuff. Who knows?
And this will all be in the show notes, dear listener.
And of course it's in the show notes. I mean, it's a bit weird if you care about that when we've got to the end. All the information you could possibly need was surely in the podcast itself, but there's also the show notes. And hey, maybe we'll put some little treats for you. Maybe not, probably not, but maybe we will. Maybe you're not going to know if you don't check them. And of course, thank you again to Brilliant Drink, who did that fantastic theme song for us. I'm sure we'll be looking forward to hearing that for many years to come of the Red Barrels podcast. I think that's going to be it. Finally, for us, I do hope you have a good Christmas. And we will see you soon and in the new year. Goodbye. Bye.
Bye.